And Chapter 15, Part 3, Confined Spaces. It is governed by that standard that you see there, Ocean 1910-146. I know that's been a popular test question for permit-required confined spaces. So this is another one where the IC and the ISO, who it could be delegated to, are tasked with a written IAP and site safety plan. Hazards of a confined space. The definition of a confined space is it has a limited means of entry and egress. It's not designed for continuous human occupancy, but it has to be big enough for a worker to bodily enter. So that's what makes it a confined space. And then you can take a look at this list and see some of the hazards associated with it. If something does go awry, it has that limited means of egress, so it could take some effort and time to get out. Toxic and flammable atmospheres. Oxygen deficiency kind of goes along with that. So those are some atmospheric hazards that are represented. Hazardous energy, it's the same levels of energy that we've discussed already, guys. It's electricity, it's pneumatic, it's even hydro at some point, hydraulic. There are significant communication difficulties in these larger confined spaces because you may not have cell service, you may not have radio reception. So you may resort to hand signals again. There's rope signals that are used in rope and confined space, even though they're not very reliable. If there is a collapse component of this, it certainly just further complicates things. But more than anything, the context clue implies that a confined space does make entry and access more difficult. And this could be the sewer roadside manhole cover. This could be something in industry, which thankfully we don't have a whole lot of in our area. But these hazards could be something as simple as a slow oxidation of, referencing the rust and mold at the bottom of this list, could be something as simple as the slow oxidation of a space where it reduces the oxygen level to something untenable, and somebody goes in for a routine inspection or routine action and is met with a environment that was less tenable than it was last time, and then bam, you have an accident. Water rescues, this is something that we face, not an all-out swift water rescue, but we have cars that go in the water all the time. We have the occasional drowning incident on the Amite River that usually turns into a recovery. But there are certainly specific hazards that go along with this. Swift water is its own animal. There is a tremendous amount of force with moving water. If any of y'all have ever been on the beach, you can feel how much the water just pulls at your ankles whenever you get in and get a feel for the water and the temperature and everything. So imagine hundreds of thousands of gallons moving through neighborhoods during these flood events. It's very serious. And all the subsurface hazards that you can't account for, utilities included, all of that kind of plays into this. Depending on the water temperature, hypothermia could be an issue also, but we usually don't cross that bridge down here in South Louisiana because it's warm 13 out of 12 months of the year. Appropriate level of PPE is obviously going to include PFDs and water-friendly equipment, the throw bags that we have, helmets where they're applicable. Not necessarily going into the dive world with this one. We're talking about surface water operations and swift water operations. So PFD is going to be your best friend. Anybody who operates within the water's edge vicinity needs to be protected. And I'm talking about as close as 15, maybe 20 feet out. Anybody within that area needs to have a PFD on at a minimum. So this is a road that got washed out, pretty significant flood event. And you can see that there's a rescue underway upstream of what's going on here. This looks like some type of very quick onset natural disaster, but some of the hazards that we've talked about are present here. Rope rescue hazards, definitely a league of its own. Same rules apply. If you do not have the knowledge to be an incident safety officer on a rope call, where that equipment is going to be deployed, you need to appoint an ASO rescue tech for that discipline. Heights kind of speak for itself, but everything up here, the hazards essentially echo from other disciplines. Limited access, you may have to climb to where the patient is or past it and get above them for an advantage. Very limited escape routes once you encounter those heights. Also, weather and utilities is essentially going to be the rest of that list. When you get to work at heights, equipment management becomes very, very important. Also, you don't want to drop that. One, you might need that piece of equipment. Two, if you drop something from great height, it becomes a missile and a hazard to those that are below you. For rope rescues, thankfully, we've never encountered anything too high here. Risk benefit evaluations are very, very important here. Depending on the situation, being trained on the rescue and being willing to conduct it. Obviously, we want to make sure that all of that, these rescuers are physically and psychologically ready to effect that rescue. And the ASO rescue tech, if they are appointed, if the ISO meets all the requirements, they can handle it. But it's up to those people to monitor the effectiveness of the rescue on behalf of the incident commander, but also monitor their people in that situation, because you look for signs of stress, signs of fatigue, signs of fear. Nobody's immune to some of those types of fear. So we want to keep that in mind whenever we're monitoring our people that are operating at these incidents. Thankfully, well, I guess the fortunate misfortune behind our presence at MVAs is something pretty common for us. So some of the hazards associated with it, obviously the vehicle, the leak in fluids, any fire that might be present, we can take care of that. There is a hazmat component to this. If there is a hazmat incident that is being presented at an MVA, we need to treat it as such. We need to be able to mitigate both of those. But around here, some of our near misses and some of our greatest threats have been on roadways because of traffic. Traffic is probably our single greatest threat to our incidents on the roadways out here. So some of our control measures, if you take the earlier chapters as a model, we have SG9 that responds whenever they're available, which most of the time they are. They have advanced warning devices for traffic. Got 2 aero bars on the back of that truck, more cones than you can shake a stick at, some very large signs. All that helps with the traffic. I don't know that we will ever get to a point where we completely eliminate the traffic hazard for us, but that's going to be a big one for us. Creating barriers, getting those cones and some type of advanced warning deployed as soon as possible. Block-in positions with your bigger apparatus, all that kind of comes natural to us. I'm not going to beat that to death. And some of these other specific transportation incidents. So we'll talk about the vehicle extrication component very quickly. There are times where we see a charged hose line deployed for auto extrication, and there's sometimes where we don't. If there is a significant risk or with leaking fluids and there is a potential for fire, we obviously want to be protected by that charged hose line during extrication. It's never a bad idea to have a charged hose line for auto extrication. Auto extrication could be treated as something similar to an industrial entrapment, where you have somebody that's entrapped in mangled metal. We're just using a little bit different tools than we would in a man versus machine kit. So you're using big power tools to remove somebody from metal, plastic, other vehicle construction components. We obviously want to make sure that hazardous energy is isolated there as well, whether that be cutting the battery. If it's some of these electric vehicles that we see on the road now, we need to take some type of special care. It may even require some research on how to make those vehicles safe. When it comes to these other unique incidents, the aircraft incidents, never been to anything like that, but you can kind of sit back and pregame and understand what kind of hazards are going to be present there. and then railway and subway incidents. Railway is a lot more likely for us in our area since we don't have any subterranean transportation as of yet, but rail railway incidents, train derailments and stuff like that is probably going to be a large hazmat call. So you may have several disciplines in that, such as auto extrication, some type of entrapment. You could have a lot of different disciplines involved in that response. So just keep that in mind and educate yourself on some of the hazards there as well. That is the end of chapter 15 also. So if you want to take time to explore that summary, you certainly can.